norms, shall we? DLC districts, we always make sure to review our norms. I gotta be careful about walking in front of that speaker so I don't cause feedback. All right, so the norms on the screen, fairly standard, simple stuff. Let's work on avoiding distractions. Now, some of you may have cherubs at home that you need to communicate with and that sort of thing. Completely understandable if you need to stay in touch there. But otherwise, let's make an effort to avoid distractions. Listen more than you speak. Treat all team members with respect. Work hard to ensure that all members of your team contribute. And then finally, please stay open to change and adaptation, because anytime we see changes to the standards themselves or adjustments, we know that's going to trickle into the classroom. So loosen your minds. You can do that. Context. Some of you may have heard this before. Back in January, I actually held a kind of a Zoom meeting with any teachers who wanted to come to talk about what these performance standards are about, and to explain what was coming down the road. We'll run through that again quickly now. So a couple of years ago, through some conversations that were happening through the State Board of Education, they approve all of the standards that are proposed by the Wyoming Department of Ed. The Department of Ed works on proposals. They send them to the State Board. They review them and vote on them. And then they send them to the governor, who ultimately signs them, and they kind of become the law of the land. So the State Board was seeing these different sets of standards coming through, and they all look really different. You know this, especially if you're an elementary teacher and you navigate between lots of different sets of standards, that they're drastically different. And they started asking questions like, what about all this prioritization that districts are doing? And we've been prioritizing standards in our school district for at least 15 years. Back to the power standard days, when we started looking at it. That was a long time ago. But the Attorney General looked this over and said, you know what, this is probably unconstitutional, that every district in Wyoming has their own set of priorities. Because according to the Constitution, children are entitled to a uniform education. That's what the state is supposed to provide, making sure that every kid in Wyoming has the same chance to learn an important set of stuff. But if every district is prioritizing differently, that's not how it's going to turn out. So the AG sent that opinion back to the State Board and to the Department of Ed, and their response was to say, well, we're just going to start prioritizing at the state level. We're going to create these things called performance standards. You might remember performance level descriptors from the past. That's kind of gone now, and in our performance standards, which are prioritized by the State Committee of Educators for you. So computer science is already done. They did those right away. Math and science, all the work has been done, the legwork to do the prioritization and to come up with performance standards. They've been approved by the State Board of Education and are with the governor as we speak, waiting to be signed in the next couple of days. We're diving in. We thought they were going to be signed Friday. They may have been, but I don't really know how to confirm that. I lost the governor's phone number, and I just can't find it. So anyway, what does this mean for us? So state statute, we're not going to go too deep into this. State statute requires that all districts have something called a district assessment system. This is how the state ensures or holds us accountable for teaching the standards. We have latitude in how we build that, but we all have to have a district assessment system. And for these content areas where we have performance standards, we have to be able to document that they're part of our district assessment system. All right, so that's what we're going to be digging into, is your curriculum and assessments and that kind of thing. It does not mean elementary science teams. This does not mean that we need to make science tests. Remember, we're not doing tests in elementary science. But we do have to show documentation that we're teaching these and that we have a way of collecting whether students are learning or not. So that's the backstory. We're going to get a jump start on this. Once the governor signs it, school districts have 1 year to implement these changes. When new standards are written, districts have 3 years. But again, this is just an adjustment for performance standards, so we only have 1 year, so we're jumping in right away to get rolling. Okay, that's the context. We feeling good? Great way to start the day. So here's what we're going to do over the next 3 days. practices that underlie your standards. So math and science are two of the three content areas that have practices built into the standards. The other one is computer science. But we think a lot about how kids do math and how kids think and act like scientists. Those are built into the standards, so we're going to start there because they're really important foundations. Then we're going to unwrap the performance standards themselves. So those are the two things that we're going to do today. Practices followed by unwrapping. Then we'll move into curriculum. Evaluate, adjust, develop curriculum and assessments relative to the performance standards. Make sure that, are we teaching the performance standards? Do we need to make some changes to what we do? And then we'll do a vertical analysis. That'll come Wednesday and kind of make sure that things are flowing up and down across the grade levels. We'll check in with these objectives several times as we move across the summer. Here's the basic agenda based on those objectives. So today, we are currently setting objectives, just like it says on the agenda. So I feel like I'm on track. Do you feel like I'm on track? We are on track? Good, good. We're going to revisit some foundations, some really important stuff to anchor the work. Then we will go through those practices and start unwrapping the performance standards after lunch. And then you can see what we're going to do on day 2, standards crosswalk, curriculum and assessment design, day 3, vertical analysis, more curriculum and assessment design. Most of this time will be you working with your team. A vast majority of it. This morning will be more guided, and then it will sort of gradually release to you as we move across the days. Here's what the schedule is going to look like. We're thinking this will be the same schedule for each day. In case you need to call home or you need to run and get a snack. We'll take a break at 10 and then a break at 2. Lunch will be 11:30 to 12:30. We'll get started again at 12:30. Finishing up by 3:30 each day. Good? Okay, so some foundations. We're going to do some review of concepts that are important to us as a school district, and for a very specific reason. So let me go back before we get into that. I think it's really one of the reasons why things work in our school district the way that they do, and why our teachers achieve the levels of student learning that you do, is because we don't change course all the time. We have been doing professional learning communities work for 17 years in our school district, and we haven't changed course. We have been doing things like digging into standards for a really long time. We haven't changed course. The foundations for what we do are simple, and we believe that we shouldn't, throw out a brand new shiny ball every year. A lot of educators deal with this. You've maybe even heard of this term called initiative fatigue, where teachers in other districts around the country, every year there's some brand new thing. Here's what we're going to do this year. We just don't do that. So you're able to actually get good at what you do, and we're working within the frameworks that we have. So that's what this foundations piece is about, is anchoring this work into some foundations that are important to us, acknowledging the fact that we're not here to do anything new. We're here to refine and improve upon the stuff that we already are good at. Okay, so who recognizes this? Give me one of these if this looks familiar. Or it's a kind of a new, snazzy view of John Hattie's little dashboard, right? His speedometer, if you will. This is put together by Corwin. That's Hattie's publisher. But it's a new look at his effect sizes. So John Hattie's a researcher that we put a lot of, I guess we rely a lot on his work. He uses a technique called meta-analysis, where he gathers all the studies that he can find, he and his team, that tie to one specific concept or one factor that they think might have an influence on student learning. And they take all those studies and kind of scrunch them together and do a lot of statistical wrangling, and they calculate what they call an effect size. Now, an effect size simply is a number that represents the influence of a factor on learning. The higher the effect size, the higher the influence of that factor on learning in a positive way. And then the lower the effect size, the less the impact. You can even get into negative and reverse effects, as you see in that red zone. Those are things that actually hurt student learning. Things like boredom or suspending and expelling kids, retention, summer vacation, not great for learning, as you know. Now, once you get to that vertical line, kind of in the middle, that's an effect size of 0.4, and that's what Patty kind of refers to as a hinge point. 0.4 effect size means that if something, so if a factor has an effect size of 0.4, if you do that for 1 year, you're going to get 1 year's worth of growth. So 1 year of input equals 1 year of growth at an effect size of 0.4. So at that point, it's worth doing. Anything to the left is something we need to think about whether we should be doing it or not. So if you look in the green, there's things like teaching to the test or teaching test taking, homework, etc. Reducing class size statistically doesn't help that much. And there's some other things in there as well. It doesn't mean that they're bad. Stuff in the red is bad. The stuff in the yellow and the green is just like maybe doesn't help that much. Once you get into the blue past the 0.4, that means this is stuff that helps a lot. Over the next couple of days, we're going to focus on 2 things specifically that help a lot. The first one is teacher clarity. All right, teacher clarity has an effect size of 0.75. So what this tells us is if you're really, really clear on what your standards mean and where you are taking your kids relative to those standards, if you're really clear on that, there's potential for your students to learn about twice as much as if you weren't thinking about that at all. Remember, 0.4 is 1 year of input for 1 year of output, and this is almost double. Now, the biggest effect size of all is a thing called collective teacher efficacy with an effect size of 1.57. Now, collective teacher efficacy is an interesting one to think about because efficacy means that it refers to the belief in oneself to accomplish something. But collective efficacy means that as a group, we believe that we can help students learn. How do we get there? How do we develop a collective belief that all students can learn? Well, we do it actually through the professional learning community's philosophy and framework, and we're anchoring what we do over the next few days in that. So again, teacher clarity, effect size 0.75. Collective teacher efficacy has an effect size of 1.57, or almost 4 times that hinge point of 0.4. All right, so let's dig into each one of these for just a moment. I'll give you a second to read this quote from Hattie about clarity from visible learning feedback. All right, so there's an interesting bit of contrast here between the title of the slide and the text. Who can point out what that difference is? Somebody besides Jules, please. Colton.
One says teacher clarity and it's about student clarity.
Yeah, perfect. So Jules, is that what you were going to say too? Nice. Okay. I'll let you talk next time. One says teacher clarity and one says student clarity. So just take a minute at your table and unpack that. Like, why would, when he's talking about teacher clarity, why does he immediately go into student clarity? Go for it. Okay. Any brave souls willing to share your conversation, to stand up and speak loudly and boldly in front of 70 people? Anyone? I know that some of you are okay doing this. effect size. And this is played out systematically within the PLC framework and the 4 critical questions of the PLC. Here's probably the most important thing about these 4 critical questions, is that we're never done answering them. We work in cycles constantly to refine our answers. I mean, most of us can probably remember the first time we ever got into this, and really how difficult it was, if we were there at the beginning, to even start addressing question 1 as a group. It was really hard. Now, if we would have just left it there and hadn't refined anything, our kids would not be benefiting the way they are. So here are some attributes of a high-functioning professional learning community. This is what the right work looks like. So a true PLC continually revisits and refines answers to the 4 critical questions. It's a cycle. It's not something we did once. It's not an event. It's a cycle. A true PLC works collaboratively to develop systematic and system-wide responses to the 4 questions. So what that really means is that one teacher can't stay in their room by themselves and say, well, I'm doing the 4 questions. That's not system-wide. System-wide means it needs to be the whole grade level. It needs to be the whole school. Next, we work to ensure consistent system-wide responses to the 4 questions. Now, that's a little different than developing answers to them. What about responses? Like, what are we actually doing? Are we setting aside time for intervention and enrichment, for example? And then finally, we seek and implement new tools to address the 4 questions. So the way that we were identifying power standards 15 years ago is different from the way we were setting priority and supporting standards 5 years ago. The way we collected data and stored it 10 years ago is different from how we collect and store data now, and those tools will be evolving over time. So a lot of this is about not getting stuck in a rut, not treating those 4 questions as an event, but instead as a cycle. So we're going to focus on questions 1 and 2 over the next 3 days. What do we expect students to learn? And we have a lot more guidance on this because of the performance standards than we used to. And then finally, how will we know if they've learned it? That's the assessment question. You'll get to take some time to think about how we're assessing, and you'll have time to work on that as well. Well, good job working on those practices for your grade band. That seemed to go really well. Listen to some really solid conversation at your tables. Seemed like we were digging in, thinking, and so mission accomplished. We've got a really solid baseline. Here's what we're going to do next. We're going to do a vertical jigsaw. It will go like this. So posted around the room are some of the practices for math and science. Some, not all. For science, we have analyzing and interpreting data over here. In this corner, we have developing and using models. Over there, planning and carrying out investigations. And then finally, engaging in argument from evidence. So we picked 4 of the science practices. Those are posted. For math, I think Mr. Mowry picked 5. Will you run us through those?
Yeah. For math, it's the last 5. Mathematical practice 4 model, mathematics 5. Use appropriate tools strategically, attempt to precision, look for make use of structure, and look for express regularity in their reasoning. So we're going to select one of those 5 math grades out.
Good. So at your table, you're going to, with your grade level or your group, however it's organized, we're going to do a divide and conquer approach. So say that we have 4 science SEPs on the walls. If there happen to be the lucky number 4 on your science team, you're each going to pick one and scatter and go to that poster. If you have 5 people in your group, that's okay. 2 of you can go together. If you have 2 people or 3 people in your group, that's okay too. Just pick 2 different ones and split apart. So then once you're gathered at those posters, we're going to have a vertical discussion. You have some really basic instructions here, but it should just take care of itself. So you're going to huddle with the team and then talk over the vertical progression, like start at kindergarten and work your way up. And if you don't have a representative for that grade level, that's okay. You can still see what they wrote down, because the links to all of them, all of the matrices are there. And just ask these couple of questions. Do you see A, increasing complexity as you move up through the grade levels? And B, is there any evidence of decreased scaffolding as you move up through the grade levels? And then take some notes, and then you're going to be able to come back to your tables and make some adjustments. Or you could even make adjustments while standing right there with your group. The whole idea of this, again, it's not to get it perfect, it's to get these practices really anchored in our brains. And to think, like, there should be a difference in complexity from one grade to the next. If you don't see that, we'll talk about it and take some notes and make some adjustments. Then after this is over, you'll come back to your grade level team and sort of share out what you learned. Do you feel like you kind of know what to do? It doesn't matter that we don't have every grade level with someone at every poster. That's okay. It's really more about the thinking that we're doing than about covering all the bases. Are we good? You know what to do? Okay, awesome. Please commence. Find a poster, go for it. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to finish today by unwrapping performance standards. So we're really going to dig into the new work. Just a quick reminder of the norms that we have in place. You can read those on the screen. All right, unwrapping, here we go. So our objectives for the summit, again, to deepen our understanding of the practices. We've done that. We're going to start unwrapping now. Tomorrow you'll get into evaluating, adjusting, and developing curriculum and assessments that align to the new performance standards, and then we'll have vertical analysis that comes into play on Wednesday. Okay, now, anatomy of a performance standard. When you get into those performance standard documents, you're going to see this sort of a layout. You'll know a performance standard by some really clear indications. One, they are highlighted in teal. Two, there is a little asterisk at the beginning of the standard code. You got that? Highlighted in teal, asterisk at the beginning of the standard code. That means flashing lights. This is a performance standard. Another new thing that you will notice in these standards is the little gray box right below the standard itself. It says the proficient student. So they've written a proficiency descriptor to go along with each performance standard. And the number of performance standards vary from grade level to grade level, but you're dealing with probably at elementary like 5 or 6 per grade level in math and science. When you get into junior high and high school, everything changes. Junior highs are 6 through 8, and you just kind of have to, we'll have to look at them based on how you've sequenced things across the integrated 3 years. And this would also be an opportunity as we move through the next couple of days for you to think about which grade level you're addressing some of these standards and whether you feel like you want to make changes. I mean, when new standards come out, that's the time to really think about change. High school, even more complicated because there's lots of them and you have to divide them across all of these different courses. And with 2 common courses that kids take, physical and bio, it's kind of a dance. So I think the way you started by focusing on physical science, kind of carrying that forward and thinking, what are the classes that most kids take? Let's dig into those first. That'll lay a foundation for you to build forward. Okay, so here's the anatomy, really simple. Then I have some examples. This is what the sheets look like. You can see there's a watermark on these documents still that says draft. We do not have the final form yet, but we're going to work from the draft. I have it on authority from someone who knows what they're talking about, the chairman of the State Board of Education, who actually has an office right over here in this building, that this is reliable stuff and we're good to go. So I'm not worried about that, but this is what physical science from the high school looks like. That's a page there that you can reference. And then here's 7th grade math. Again, the teal is kind of hard to see on this screen, but it's very much there, and you can see those shaded areas, the proficient student, ... Okay, we feeling good about what we're going to look at? So now we're going to get into how this will unfold. So one of the sort of architects of unwrapping standards, dissecting standards, creating teacher clarity, success criteria, all that stuff, is a fellow named Larry Ainsworth. He literally wrote the book on this, several of them in fact. Some of you have probably seen him present over the years. He's very, very good at helping teachers get clear on what their standards mean and how to teach them. So he laid out this process for unwrapping standards. You've probably done something much like this before, but he gives us just some simple key strategies. And so I'm going to do some modeling for you and then let you practice a little bit and then turn you loose. So here are the steps that Mr. Ainsworth lays out. First is you find the verbs in the standard and you capitalize those, because the verbs are what drive learning. You would recognize these verbs from places like Bloom's taxonomy, Webb's descriptors, learning verbs. You find them, capitalize them, and think that these are really important. Step two is then you find the nouns and noun phrases that represent kind of the content and or the skills, and you underline those. So teachable concepts. It's different than verbs. Concepts are underlined. And then I'll kind of walk you through how to take those pieces and break it down into bulleted success criteria. And you'll see that with some standards, it might seem like a simple sentence, but there might be 4 things going on, 4 separate things that kids need to do, all embedded in one simple sentence. So taking the time to unwrap these and break them down will create a lot of clarity for you. So we're going to start with a language arts example. So at this point, if you have a device, and just shark that for a minute, and let's use the screen up here, because I don't want you working ahead if you're an overachiever. So this is informational reading standard 6 from 6th grade. Determine an author's point of view or purpose in a text and explain how it's conveyed in that text. So in your little brains, think for a second, what are the verbs? Let's start with the verbs. And we're going to capitalize those. So think, what are the verbs? I know this is your science people, math people, I'm sorry. Verbs can be difficult. The elementary teachers have this on lockdown. Okay, you got them? Turn and tell your neighbor, what are the verbs that you see here?
Our bodies.
Don't worry about it. All right, you got the verbs? How many do you see? 2. Nice job. Wait a second. Oh, wait. No, I'm good. These are the instructions. So we're capitalizing the verbs right now, okay? All right, so you found 2 verbs. They are determine and explain. Were you right? Correct? Excellent. Excellent. All right, so step 2 is to underline the teachable concepts. These are your important nouns and noun phrases. So take a moment at that standard and think, what are those teachable concepts? What are the key nouns or noun phrases that you see hiding in the standard? And you can turn and talk when you're ready. Okay, so how many different concepts, teachable concepts, do you think are hiding in the standard? I see 3. 3, okay. All right, I hear 2. All right, let's take a look. I'm not saying that this is the definitive answer, but here's one way to look at it. That you have author's point of view or purpose, which could be broken in 2, point of view and purpose, right? And then you have how it's conveyed in the text is another thing that's important, all right? And then the third step is to break it down into success criteria. And this will become really clear to you right when you see this next slide. So there's 4 things going on here. And if you just glance at the standard and think, oh yeah, point of view, purpose, I got this, I'm going to go in my lesson, you might miss a bunch of it. So first, we need students to determine an author's point of view and determine an author's purpose. And those are different things in the world of language arts. Then, after they determine it, which is kind of like identify, find, right? Then they're going to explain how the point of view is conveyed in the text and explain how the purpose is conveyed in the text. So when you really unwrap this thing, there's 4 different skills going on. How many of you teach something just like this in elementary? Yeah, all of you, actually, right? Because author's purpose and point of view is pervasive across the grade levels in language arts standards. Okay, how you feeling? Okay, we walked through 1. Okay, now that was sort of I do, you help. Let's think about this math standard. I will do less on this one and put a little more on you. Okay, so this is a 2nd grade math standard. It's really interesting, I think. Explain why addition and subtraction strategies work using place value and the properties of operations. So, find the verbs, think them through, talk at your table about those verbs. Okay, you got the verbs? Let's move on to teachable concepts. Those nouns and noun phrases. Find the concepts. Okay, how many things, if you start thinking about putting the verbs with the nouns, how many different things do you think are going on in this standard? In that language arts standard we just looked at, there were 4, all in one quick standard. Okay, you ready? Here it is. So we have, our verbs are explain and use, right? Those are the verbs that drive the action of the standard. And then your teachable concepts, addition and subtraction strategies, place value, and then properties of operations. This is 2nd grade. It breaks into 4 pieces. Explain why. Addition strategies work using place value. Explain why addition strategies work using properties of operations. I don't think I can do this. I can do addition and subtraction, right? But I'm not sure I can do this. Because, what's that? Yeah, Jeff can explain it. But so there's something really fascinating about this standard. What does it, and I think it's what it leaves out. What is it not asking kids to do? It's not asking them to use numbers. It's not asking them to do any calculations related to these operations. It's asking them to explain why. Right? And this is a big difference between how I learned math as a kid and how you teach our students math now. Big difference. They actually have to understand the math, not just memorize an algorithm.